So, in the field of cryptozoology, one of the things I'm most recognized for is my research into Thunderbirds. And you guys ever heard of these Thunderbirds? Yeah. I mean, when you hear the name Thunderbird, some of you probably think of like a vintage sports car. Some of you think of a fine wine. So, I mean, but we're going to talk about the root of the story here. I've been investigating accounts of Thunderbirds, monstrous birds that science does not recognize for at least 20 years, maybe longer. I've interviewed many witnesses who are very credible, seemingly credible, who talk about experiences. In fact, even today, a nice lady has come up and shared her Thunderbird sighting with me. Some of you may have seen these Thunderbirds. They're not as glamorous as, of course, Bigfoot and Dogman and some of these other cryptids. And in fact, a lot of people, I don't even think a lot of people acknowledge that these are unknowns. I hear this all the time. Well, I've done some TV shows about Thunderbirds, written books about them, and people come to me and say, I saw one of those. I just thought it was a damn big bird, but it had a 20-foot wingspan. I was like, yeah, there's nothing like that. So I hope you guys find this interesting. We're trying to give you a little bit of a cryptid variety here. Probably don't get as much press as they did back in the day, but particularly during the 1970s, there were some very notable Thunderbird reports that actually made the newspapers. And in case of what I personally investigated, I live in South Central Texas, San Antonio, and down in the Rio Grande Valley, and stretching up to San Antonio, there are and have been accounts of these monstrous birds with wingspans ranging from 15 to 20 feet across, which is basically the size of a small airplane, right? So I will go over some birds that are very large, that are that we've all probably familiar with or have seen at one time or another, just to give you some sense of scale. But these are, right here we have some newspaper reports from the Rio Grande Valley. Thank you, Daniel. And in fact, beginning in January of 1976, there were several encounters and sightings with a giant bird in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, and the newspapers named it the Big Bird. And yes, they did borrow from Sesame Street, because when I was growing up in 1976, Sesame Street was a pretty big deal. So, probably the most notable case, at least what I'm concerned, is, well, let's go there. This is a pretty scary, there was a man in Raymondville, Texas. Raymondville is a little town down in the Rio Grande Valley. On January 14th, 1976, a resident of Raymondville named Armando Grimaldo claimed that this thing attacked him. That he was sitting out on his porch one night smoking a cigarette, and he heard a sound like wind rushing or wings beating, and he said he looked up and this thing was descending upon him. And it attacked him, he began to run, it tore at him, tore his clothes, and he actually had to dive belly first into some bushes to get away from it. And he was in a state of shock. He had to be rushed to the Willacy County Hospital. So that's a pretty dramatic encounter. And there have been some other alleged attacks and things. But we're really scaring you guys today, aren't we? Yeah. Don't go to the LDL. Watch out for the smoking dogs, the big birds, they'll all get you. I have lived in San Antonio, Texas for about 16 years, and this is a pretty interesting case. There were 3 high school teachers south side of San Antonio that were driving to school one morning, and they claimed that they were in separate cars. They claimed that they saw 2 monstrous birds the size of small airplanes soaring over a cow pasture. And they pulled over, they were so in shock and in awe that they actually pulled their cars over and got out and looked at these things. And they described them as looking kind of prehistoric. In fact, when they got back to school and started going through some encyclopedias and things, they thought, well, maybe these were pterodactyls, which you guys probably know pterodactyls are not birds at all. They're giant flying reptiles that supposedly went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. But the largest flying animal ever on our planet is Quetzalcoatlus northropi, which had a wingspan of about 40 feet across, and they actually have found its fossils in West Texas. Nothing like that is supposed to be alive today. There was a gentleman in Brownsville, Texas, named Armando Grimaldo, who claimed that he heard a thump one night, January 7th, 1976, heard a loud thump on the side of his trailer home, and he grabbed a knife and a flashlight and went outside, and he said there was this large bird, and he described it, his exact quote was, "It looked like a bird, but not a bird. It was not of this earth," which is kind of an interesting description. And he had kind of a standoff with this big bird. It stood about 5 feet tall, and he said that its throat was pulsing, it was making a weird noise. And oddly, the bird didn't fly off, it actually backed off into the darkness and disappeared. So this is just a sample size of some of the Big Bird reports. And I do have copies of my first book, Big Bird, over here at my table if you guys want to hear more about the events that transpired in the Rio Grande Valley in 1976 and in San Antonio. And so it was a pretty big deal at that time. So knowing about these stories is kind of what got me recognized in the field of cryptozoology, because when I was, about 20 years ago, I was like really trying to make a name for myself, and I met a cryptozoologist named Lauren Coleman. Some of you guys have heard of Lauren Coleman, who was kind of a mentor of mine, at that time, an idol. And I met Lauren and I said, Lauren, how do I kind of build my reputation in the field of cryptozoology? And without skipping a beat, he says, write a book. As soon as you write a book, if it's a good book and it has good information, you'll be asked to do lectures, other researchers will reach out to you, and that's kind of how it started for me. So if there are any of you out there that are interested in kind of, becoming more of a serious researcher or becoming a little bit more, of a full-time researcher, that's what, write a book, but, pick something that maybe has been neglected, which is what I did, because no one had ever written a book about the Big Bird of South Texas. And I was in a prime position to research it, because I lived right there, so I could go down there and find the eyewitnesses and things like that. So that's another thing I have a lot of young researchers. We're in good hands, guys, because I have a lot of high school students, college students that come to me and say, how do I get into this? What do I do? How do I... And one of the advices I always give to researchers, any researcher, is play the home field advantage. And by that I mean, if there's something in your area that's worthy of investigation, focus on that, because logistically it's going to be much easier for you to spend a lot of time in that area. I mean, sure, we all love to fly to Africa and investigate the Mokele and Mbembe. You guys know what Mokele and Mbembe is, the living dinosaur, or the orang pendek, but how many times are you going to be able to afford to go over there, So it's play the home field advantage. If you live on the edge of the LBL, that's your spot. If, pretty much anywhere in the U.S. you could find some cryptids and mysterious creatures that would be worthy of investigation. A lot of people don't know this, but the Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, by the way, Nick, Redfern, Lyle Blackburn, and I will be at the Mothman Festival this September. If any of you folks are up near Point Pleasant, we'll all be giving talks. But a lot of people don't know this, but the name Mothman didn't come until months after the sightings began in November of 1966. In fact, for a long time, it was known as the bird, the Mason County bird. That's what people were calling it. So Mothman is a name that kind of was, again, just like Big Bird, was kind of created by the newspapers, and it was sexy and cool and weird, and we see all these renditions now of Mothman with a very insect-like appearance, which is not, it's just based on the name and not the physical descriptions. But many of the original eyewitnesses of Mothman described something that looked like a big bird. In fact, there was an eyewitness named Thomas Urey. I'm going to back this off just a hair. I'm a little louder than most folks. There was an eyewitness named Thomas Urey in December of 1966, about a month after the original. For you Mothman buffs, you know about the Scarberry Mallet encounter and then the Martella Bennett encounter. Those were the first two. But in December of 1966, there was a gentleman named Thomas Urey, who was a shoe salesman, who was driving to Point Pleasant, and he claimed he looked up and saw this giant bird circling over his car and kind of disappeared off over the treetops. And he told the newspapers when they asked him, they said, well, what was this thing? Was it humanoid? He said, no, it was a bird. It was a massive, huge bird. That's what it was. It was nothing known, but it was not a Mothman. It was a bird. And Thomas Urey, I don't know if he's still alive, but even in recent years, he was doing presentations at the Mothman Festival trying to drive that point home. What I saw was a Thunderbird. It was not a humanoid creature. So you have some of that crossover there where maybe, you know, a lot of this stuff boils down to interpretation, right, with cryptids. You can imagine when a lot of people see a cryptid, whether it's a Dogman or a Bigfoot or whatever, it's a very intense moment. Sometimes these are fleeting encounters, they happen quickly, they're emotionally charged situations, and so people oftentimes may have trouble correctly perceiving or interpreting what it was that they just know they saw something incredible or something that they can't explain. So I mean, maybe some, I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe some of the Mothman sightings could be attributed to Thunderbird accounts. Okay, so let's talk a little bit, because I am a zoology nerd. As a cryptozoologist, I'm a zoology nerd. So let's talk about the 6 characteristics of birds. Birds are warm-blooded or endothermic, meaning that they can regulate their own body temperature. All birds are vertebrates, meaning they have a bony skeletal structure. But a lot of you guys may know this, but their bones are essentially hollow, and that helps them achieve flight because they're so incredibly lightweight. Even a very massive bird, like I'm describing to you, would be relatively light compared to how big it is. Birds have a 4-chamber heart. That's, of course, different than mammals. We have a 2-chamber heart. I guess we have the 4-chamber in the reptiles. Birds all have feathers. They're all covered in feathers. And there's actually been, now that we've found fossils of pterosaurs, they've actually been able to study pterosaur fossils in China that have feathers, or feather-like structures called pycnofibers. So the pterodactyls and pterosaurs that we love to see in Jurassic World and Jurassic Park are not accurate because they actually did have, not necessarily on their wings, because their wings were membranous, but on their bodies, they had these primitive feather-like structures called pycnofibers, which might have actually looked somewhat feather-like. So the point I'm trying to make in here is going back to perception is pterosaurs and pterodactyls probably looked a lot more like birds than we realize, even though they were reptiles and not birds. All birds lay eggs, of course. This is called oviparous. All birds have scales on their legs and feet. Also, this is a fun fact, birds have lungs, of course, but all birds, their bodies are filled with little air sacs, and that actually helps them retain buoyancy, and that's why they vocalize. So when you hear a bird chirping, it's actually like a squeeze toy. That's what they're doing, they're squeezing their body and making little chirping sounds. So, very unique animals, of course, we love birds. The San Antonio Zoo, which I work with as a volunteer educator, is one of the best bird collections in the country, and we actually breed a lot of critically endangered birds like Micronesian kingfishers. We helped save the whooping crane from extinction in 1956. There were only 16 whooping cranes left in the world, and we started to breed them. And we have one of the best bird veterinarians in the world, Dr. Rob Koch. Okay, so let's talk about big birds in North America. These are some of the largest known birds in North America. And the point that I'm going to make here is that there are some people, on some occasions, that may see birds that are not very common in their area, and perhaps they misidentify those bird species and make them into Thunderbirds, perhaps. So this is a California condor. Latin name is Gynogypes californianus. There are only about 500 of these birds in the world. They all live in. And notice how he's got tags on them, so this is an indication of how closely California condors are monitored. Many of them are already tagged and have an identity, and they're closely watched by wildlife management specialists. This is the current endemic range for the California condor. They have been introduced into the Grand Canyon area and parts of southern Utah. They have traditionally been in Baja California and Southern California. Now, based on fossils from the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, we know that condors actually were much more widespread I don't know if they came too far into the east, but certainly throughout the Rocky Mountains, other parts of the Pacific Northwest and so forth, there probably were condor populations. So Thunderbird reports in some of these areas might be attributed to condor sightings. Some of the Native American legends of Thunderbirds may be somewhat based on condors. That is a possibility. But you certainly wouldn't expect to find a condor in South Texas or here in Tennessee. That would be, it's not the type of habitat that a condors like elevation because they basically fall off cliffs to take flight. And that's, and they like to have those high vantage points, those perches. This is I'm curious, I might ask you guys to raise your hands to see if any of these species, if any of you have ever seen them or if they lived in your areas. Does anyone have these in your area? Thank you. This is a white pelican. Pelecanus erythrorhynchus is the Latin name. They're actually pretty big. White pelicans can have a wingspan 10 feet across. If you've ever been close to a big pelican, they are big, intimidating birds. One could say that they have a somewhat prehistoric appearance based on the shape of their head, or the long bill is kind of reminiscent of some pterodactyls. But obviously they have a white plumage or feathering and the characteristic black fringe on the other side of their wings. So this is a bird that I wouldn't think would spawn any Thunderbird accounts because they're pretty common, right? People see pelicans near the water all the time. We also have brown pelicans in North America. They're not as big as the white pelicans, and I'm sorry I can't think of the Latin name off the top of my head. This is the largest accipiterid or predatory bird or raptor that we have in North America. It's not the bald eagle, it's the golden eagle. Does anyone have golden eagles in their area? You've seen golden eagles? They're migratory birds. Sometimes you see them. The Latin name is Aquila crusados. They are sexually dimorphic, which means that the males and females of the species are different. And guess which sex is bigger? The females. The females are larger than the males, and a large female golden eagle can have a wingspan of about 7 foot 8 inches across, I think. Almost 8 feet across. And they are predatory birds, but they can only lift about half their weight. And so the largest thing that they would conceivably pick up would be like a rabbit or maybe a fawn or something like that. They may be connected to many of the accounts that we have of Thunderbirds snatching people up, because of all the known birds in North America, they're the most likely that maybe try to pick up a baby or a small child. And if anyone's going to ask me about that video on YouTube where the golden eagle picks the baby up, that's CGI. So that was a hoax that was done by some college students. So, great blue heron, Ardea herodías. Very good. I see these all the time where I live. They can have a wingspan of about 6 feet across. They're very beautiful birds. They're in the heron family, but again, the plumage is a dead giveaway, right? They have this beautiful steely blue-gray color, the little wispy feathers on the back of their head. To me at least, they're very recognizable. They live near water. They're kind of aquatic birds, and they have the long legs. So I doubt that that these could be responsible for Thunderbird accounts. This is Grus canadensis, also known as the sandhill crane. Anyone ever see these? They're probably a little bit rarer in some parts of the country. They do migrate from Canada and stuff. Strangely enough, some have suggested, mostly skeptical wildlife researchers have suggested that the sandhill crane is responsible for the Mothman. That's what people are seeing because it has these red markings on the top of its head that could be interpreted as the big red glowing eyes that people associate with Mothman. It's a little silly in my opinion. I don't think someone would see a crane in any condition and say, Mothman! But mistakes can be made. They're not as big as you would think. I think their wingspan is probably about 5.5 feet. I mean, they're tall. They can get to be about 5 feet tall, and they have long legs, but the wingspan is probably only about 6 feet, 5.5, 6 feet across. These are super, I see these all day long in Texas. How about you guys? You guys see these all the time? Turkey vulture, good old turkey vulture, buzzard. Like they say in Tennessee, it's a buzzard. Cathartes aura. They are obviously scavengers. They have a wingspan of about 5.5. People always say, oh, they have to have a 6-foot wingspan. Yeah, I guess. That would be a pretty big turkey vulture. But again, very recognizable and kind of ludicrous, but whenever Thunderbirds are mentioned to wildlife, skeptical wildlife officials will always throw out the turkey vulture. Oh, I saw this giant bird with a huge, oh, it was a turkey vulture. But no, we all know what turkey vultures look like. And this one's kind of cool. This is Mycteria americanus, which is the wood stork or wood ibis. And it's actually related to the vultures. You can see the bald head. These guys only have a wingspan of about 5.5 feet across. They're migratory, but they have a very prehistoric look, right? They look very much like pterosaurs because they have that bald head and that kind of, all the ibises have this diagnostic kind of beak that kind of slants downward. But again, mostly white plumage with black fringe. Virtually all the eyewitnesses of Thunderbirds describe solid, dark colored feathers. Black, charcoal gray, dark brown. And David was just talking about owls. The owls, of course, as he said, are a big part of mythology and folklore. In South Texas, we have something called lechuza. Josh mentioned lechuza. Lechuza is a witch that turns into an owl. And if she whistles at you, don't whistle back because she's coming to take you to the afterlife or whatever. This is the largest owl species in North America. Bubo virginianus, also known as the great horned owl. They're pretty cool, pretty majestic. I love owls, they're pretty awesome animals. They only have a wingspan of about 5 feet across, but they can certainly startle you, right? How many of you guys have been driving down a dark road at night and there's a big owl on the road, takes off, and you're like, whoa! Scary. Okay, so let's talk about the Native American, because there are some parallels to Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and perhaps to things like Dogman, in that many Native American, disparate Native American cultures all over the continent have traditions that talk about thunder beings or thunderbirds, because they're always portrayed as giant birds, much larger than golden eagles or condors or anything else. And they're often associated with the weather, which is where the name Thunderbird comes from. Because in many stories and folklores, they actually create thunder with the beating of their wings, and they shoot lightning out of their eyes, and they bring the storms and the wind. And there actually may be some scientific truth there in that very large birds do use storm fronts, because you have these great wind surges and thermal updrafts that a large bird could certainly take advantage of. And sometimes if you look up and you see dark storm clouds coming in, you might see some large birds at the front of those storm clouds kind of taking advantage of those thermal updrafts. But these are some of the Native American names. This is, by the way, this is a Thunderbird totem from the Pacific Northwest. Waganyan is from the Lakota tribe of the Dakotas. Tlanoa is a Cherokee word. Pinasay is Ojibwe or Algonquin from Canada, northeastern United States. The Chegwe is Potawatomi, which is New England. Let's see, Pomola is, I think that's Algonquin. Huhuk, Pawnee, some of these I'm going to have you guys pronounce here in a minute. But yeah, so this, is a great indication that the traditions of massive thunderbirds, giant birds, are very prevalent. So where do these stories and legends come from? Where did these Native Americans get these ideas of these massive birds? Now, the most famous incident ever involving a so-called thunderbird is called the Lawndale incident. And Lawndale is a little town in the middle of Illinois. And at 8:30 in the evening of July 25th, 1977, so on July 25th, 1977, this young boy, Marlon Lowe, who was about 9 years old at the time, weighed about 60 pounds, was out in his backyard playing with his couple of friends, Travis Goodwin, and I can't remember the other boy's name, but they were playing hide and seek. And according to his mother, Ruth Lowe, and 3 other adults that were on the property at the time, 2 massive birds came down and one of them snapped, first they came at Travis, who dove into a kiddie pool for safety, but then one of the other birds came down and snatched Marlon Lowe by his shirt strap of his tank top and carried him about 35 feet, about 2 feet off the ground. And he was finally able to kick and punch and fight his way free from this giant bird. And the two birds flew off in the direction of Kickapoo Creek. So this was witnessed by 7 people, this incident. And some of you guys some of you folks, have you ever seen a show called Monster Quest?
Yeah.
Okay, season 1, I'm on an episode called Birdzilla, which deals with Thunderbirds. And they actually interviewed Marlon Lowe as an adult, which was pretty cool because he's not easy to find. He's not on social media. I've tried to get in touch with him for years, and he doesn't talk about it, but to this day, he sticks to his story. Ruth Lowe was so concerned about one of these birds picking up a small child in the area that she called the local law enforcement and filed a report. And guess what they told her it was? Turkey vulture. Well, turkey vultures don't have grasping talons. They're scavengers, right? They're carrion eaters. They're like turkey feet. Turkey vultures literally have turkey feet. So this is a pretty dramatic incident and one that was observed by many people. And around this time period in Illinois, there were many other Thunderbird accounts. In fact, a week later, in a place called Lake Shelbyville, there was a gentleman named Texas John Huffer. Sadly, Texas John Huffer passed away this past year. He was a Native American gentleman that was out there with a movie camera. You know, he was a stringer for the local news channel, so he would like do little stories and things for the news. He was out fishing in Lake Shelbyville, and he claims he saw these 2 giant thunderbirds perched in a tree, and he blew the horn of his boat, which caused them to take off, and he filmed them. And they have that footage on the Monster Quest episode. You can also find it on YouTube. It's the only alleged footage of a thunderbird that's kind of intriguing, and most bird experts that have looked at it have said turkey vultures. But there are some that have looked at it and say, man, those are dang big turkey vultures, or they're condor size. So, yeah, Illinois. There are some classic tales of children being picked up and carried away by Thunderbirds. Perhaps the most famous happened in the 19th century when a young Swiss girl named Marie Delay was picked up and apparently carried away to a mountaintop by a large bird, where they later found her body kind of brutalized and stuff on this high mountain peak. And I don't remember the exact year. I'm a little rusty on this lecture, guys. I apologize. I'm kind of a last-minute fill-in here. So there are accounts of large. This could have been a golden eagle, perhaps, but again, Accipitarids or raptors could only pick up about half their weight. So if you have a 60-pound child, you would have to have a 120-pound bird, and that translates to a bird with a 25-foot wingspan, not a golden eagle with an 8-foot wingspan. This is a frame from the Texas John Huffer Lake Shelbyville. I know it's not a very good image, it's hard to see exactly, but again, I encourage you to look for this footage online. And at least one of the 2 birds that takes off looks bigger than anything that I would say is recognized by science. Now, there's also a mystery within a mystery here in terms of there's something known as the Thunderbird photo. Some of you guys have heard about this. This is an alleged photo that surfaced in the 1960s and 70s. A number of researchers claim to have seen it, including John Keel, who David Weatherly mentioned earlier, Ivan T. Sanderson, one of the founders of cryptozoology, and the interesting thing is that the photo, which supposedly portrays something like a pterodactyl being stretched out by a bunch of old-timers against a barn in Arizona from 1886 or 1890, that to this day no one can find the actual photo. This is a hoaxed recreation, and in fact there have been many people that have hoaxed recreations of the so-called Thunderbird photo. You can find them online. Some with Civil War soldiers, some with lumberjacks. These are all hoaxed recreations. The original Thunderbird photo that's been described and was originally described by a gentleman named Frank Pearl, who wrote an article in either Saga or Fate magazine in the 60s that's talked about this giant bird photograph. So the Thunderbird photograph has vanished. No one can ever find it. And this might be one of those weird Mandela effect things where the photo existed perhaps in another reality, in another time, and now it's disappeared from our reality. Not to get a little bit too cosmic for you, but if anyone has ever, and I guarantee I still have people to this day that write me and say, oh, I've seen that photo. And it was always in an old book at my school in the library, and I don't remember what it was called. And so it's very frustrating because no one can really find this Thunderbird photo that supposedly exists. This is a map I have on my wall at home of all the Thunderbird accounts that I've documented through the years. The black pins indicate traditional feathered Thunderbirds, like giant raptor types of birds. The red pins indicate pterosaurs and pterodactyls. And some of the oddball ones include the Mothman, which is silver, and I've got flying humanoids, which are orange, and some oddballs. But isn't it interesting, you can almost see what you could interpret as a migratory pattern here. There are clusters. So I already mentioned that in South Texas, we have the big bird. Illinois probably has more Thunderbird accounts than any other state, from the Shawnee National Forest all the way up to Chicago, and the Chicago Mothman, as people call it. And Pennsylvania, north central Pennsylvania. In fact, I did an expedition in north central Pennsylvania last year in the Black Forest. Isn't that a cool? You think the LDL sounds cool? How about I'm going to go research in the Black Forest? It sounds a lot scarier to me. I don't know. And scattered throughout. You know, I don't have any Thunderbird accounts from the Great Plains. Very few from the southern eastern United States, other than Florida. I got one earlier today. The nice lady was telling me about Arkansas. We got a few there. So yeah, a little bit of a cluster, and one could almost interpret that as being, you know, perhaps specific to a particular range or something. In October of 2002, there were some Thunderbird sightings in Alaska. In western Alaska, in a place called Manakotak, there was a bush pilot named John Boker, and I've never met him, but I've spoken to his son. And he claims that he was flying his little plane, which had a 28-foot wingspan, with a passenger, and suddenly he saw a giant bird that he had never seen before, very eagle-like, and he estimated that its wingspan was 14 feet across, based on, he knew how long the width of his wings on his plane were, and even though this picture is not real accurate, the wingspan he estimated it to be about 14 feet across. Guess what the wildlife officials said? No, they actually didn't, because there are no turkey vultures in Alaska. But they said Stellar sea eagle, which is a very large eagle, probably the largest eagle species from Siberia and Western Asia. And this is cool. Did you guys hear this past year about the Stellar sea eagle that made its way to Maine? Yeah, it flew all the way from Alaska, across North America, Victoria, Texas. It was on a ranch in Victoria, Texas for a month. And lately it's been in Maine and northeastern Canada. So you have an eagle with an 8.5-foot wingspan that's literally flown on the other side of the world. So you do have, obviously with a flying animal like this, the possibility at least that you can have a transient individual of a large species like a Stellar sea eagle in North America. And certainly if somebody saw a Stellar sea eagle in Texas, they might think Thunderbird, because it doesn't look like anything anyone's ever seen before. It's not a very well-known species of bird. They live in a very remote part of Siberia. I was in a TV series called Missing in Alaska. If any of you guys have seen that, we did an episode on the Thunderbird accounts, particularly at a place called Mount Marathon, where a woman, it's called Mount Marathon because they run a marathon up the mountain every year. It's like a big event. And there was a lady who disappeared in the middle of the marathon. And one of the theories was that maybe a Thunderbird snatched her off of this mountain. So we investigated that. We didn't find any evidence that that's what happened. But here I am at the top of Mount Marathon. Funny story here. This is beautiful too. This is near Seward in Alaska. But I had fractured my ankle on a previous episode, and I had to have surgery and go through 3 months of therapy. And when I got back, we filmed this episode. And so the producers, knowing that my ankle was coming back, they rewrote the script so that I would investigate in this helicopter and, with the pilot, and flew out over Mount Marathon, where my two team members, Jax and Tommy, had to climb the mountain. And I was flying over them on a walkie-talkie the whole time. Looking good, guys. Keep climbing that mountain. You're a little bit behind schedule. You need to hump it. You need to get to the top there. And then when they got to the top of the mountain, we landed in the helicopter, and they, almost pushed me off the top of the mountain. Now, this is an interesting account from where I live in Bexar County, Texas. In 2013, a sheriff's deputy sent me a photograph of the dash cam computer in his patrol car. And I probably could get in trouble for having this, but this is the report that he and his partner were called out to investigate on Chestnut Bluff Drive and Beach Trail in October of 2013. This is what the 911 operator wrote there is something very dark, large, and alive flying over the neighborhood as people are walking down the street. And so the sheriff's deputy and his partner, and I'm not going to say his name because he doesn't want to go on the record, went to investigate what it was, and they saw it. And he said, whatever you're investigating, these Thunderbirds, they're real. When me and my partner saw one of these things, we don't know what it was, but it was a giant flying creature at night, much larger than anything known. So I do get these types of reports late sometimes. I actually similarly, I had a police officer from Houston, Texas contact me a couple years ago, and he and a couple of his partners, when they were investigating another crime, actually saw Thunderbird as well. So this is an interesting possibility. John James Audubon, the famous ornithologist and painter who described, I forget how many species of birds, I think it was like 28 species of birds, and he was a great painter. He had one particular bird that he claimed to have shot in Kentucky, I believe, called the Washington Eagle. And he named it after the great President George Washington. This was in the early 19th century. And this is Audubon's painting of the Washington Eagle, which he claimed had a 10-foot wingspan and a beautiful golden plumage. The problem is that no one has ever seen another Washington Eagle since the time of Audubon. And so ornithologists today, bird experts, generally reject this as some kind of mistake, or the possibility that Audubon was playing a practical joke on some of his fellow ornithologists and zoologists because he was known to be a bit of a prankster. So who knows? But this is one of the suggestions in terms of some of the Thunderbird accounts could be related to a massive species of eagle that is not a golden eagle, that is not a bald eagle, something else that may be something that is either incredibly rare or went extinct in recent times. And here I am at the San Diego Zoo in 2014. Just checking the time. It was an honor to speak at an event called Comic-Con. Some of you fans of Comic-Con, I got to speak on a panel at Comic-Con because I was on a TV show called The Unexplained Files. And it was pretty cool because at the very last minute, I'm sitting on this panel and they bring out, we just added Linda Blair from The Exorcist. She's going to be sitting next to you. So that was pretty cool. I got to meet Linda Blair, and she's a real sweetheart and an animal advocate. But when the first day I got to my hotel, which is right there where the Comic-Con, Comic-Con is like, I don't know how many thousands of people go to Comic-Con. It is massive, right? The biggest comic book convention in the world. I show up, I check into my room, and I go down to the concierge, and I say, I'd like a ticket to the San Diego Zoo. And he said, in all the years of Comic-Con, you're the first person that's ever wanted to go to the San Diego Zoo. Well, you guys probably know, if you're a zoo fan, the San Diego Zoo is the greatest zoo in the world. You got to check that out. So I spent a day there, and they did have some California condors close by, but this is a reconstruction of a bird called a teratorn, Teratornis mariami. And there are hundreds of teratorn fossils that have been found in the La Brea tar pits of California. These birds went extinct at the end of the Ice Age, but they had a wingspan of this species had a wingspan of about 12 feet across. And there's a larger species known as Aeolornis incredibilis, which had a wingspan of 18 feet across. That is pretty much what people are describing. The average wingspan that's been described to me, and these are estimates, keep in mind it's hard to estimate the wingspan of a bird that's flying up in the air sometimes, but based on the hundreds of Thunderbird accounts that I've documented and put into a Excel spreadsheet, the average wingspan is 14 feet. There are estimates of larger wingspans, 20 feet across. I would disregard anything much bigger than that, but this is one of the prevalent theories that these Thunderbirds could be surviving Teratorns from the Ice Age. But why we don't have better evidence of it at this point is a real mystery. Why hasn't anyone found a giant nest, a giant egg, a giant pile of bird crap covering their car? These are the mysteries. These are the questions we must ask. Here is a reconstruction of the largest Teratorn that ever lived, called Argentivus magnificens. This is from South America, from Argentina. This bad boy had a wingspan 24 feet across, and it weighed about 150 pounds, so it would have been heavy enough to pick up Marlin Lowe. So, anyways, guys, if you want to hear more about Thunderbirds, I do have my books here. I have my first book, which covers the Texas cases and some other worldwide cases, and in this book, I have an entire chapter dedicated to Thunderbirds with several, probably dozens of Thunderbird eyewitness accounts that I list, people that I've personally interviewed. So, anyways, thank you for sticking around, guys. We're going to get set up for the panel right now. If you guys just give us a few minutes. I saw some decadent chocolate cake in the window over there. I don't know if that's still there. We got some really cool giveaways coming up here in a minute too. So please stick around a little bit longer. And we've got 6 amazing panelists for you here that are going to talk about the Dogman, all right? Thank you.